We are now in chapter 6. And the winter session has begun. It's that exhilarating time when everybody's coming back to school, everybody's coming back together. It's the winter session is beginning, and Gene says, peace has deserted Devon. And he's right. Peace has deserted the entire world. There's a world war going on. It's 1942. We're fighting the Japanese in the South Pacific, the Marines are. And it won't be long before we invade Europe. We've got ship convoys sailing the Atlantic and Nazi submarines trying to sink them. Peace has deserted the world, not just Devon. So it's ironic that in their first church chapel gathering, the sermon is about continuity. They stress continuity in everything. And Gene says this is false. It's false. Traditions have been broken, he says. Standards have been let down. Rules are forgotten due to summer's truancy. Truancy is when you skip school for like 6 months and go off and play golf or something like that. And he's right. It is false. There's a world war going on. There is no continuity. You know this as well as I do. I mean, look at this school year. It's been shattered. The continuity of this year has been shattered by this situation we're in. The gypsy music of summer is over. Summer is over. And you get that sinking feeling, summer's ending and you got to go back to school. Phineas's fall, he says, has ended the music. If you break the rules, they break you. Well, Phineas broke the rules, but he did it in kind of a humorous, easygoing way. Gene never breaks rules, but apparently he's broken one of his own. Leper Lepellier. Let's look at leper's name. A leper. A leper is somebody who has a disease called leprosy. And Leper Lepellier is a different kind of guy, a little bit weirder than everybody else. And because he's the leper, we've shunted him off to another part of the campus. He's living in some other dorm somewhere, maybe in a basement or something like that. We want to get him out of the way. In his place comes Hadley Brinker. Hadley Brinker is your standard class politician, big man on campus, Mr. Popularity. Everybody wants to be his friend, and he's squeaky clean, and nobody thinks badly of him. He has taken Leper Lepellier's place, because Leper is luckless, and we will see how luckless he is later on. The gypsy days of summer are over, and that's that. It's the reality. Now let's go back to the end of chapter 4. Gene says, it was the first clumsy act I had seen Phineas perform when he fell off that tree limb. But in this chapter, we find that Gene is remembering when Finney was in a canoe on the Devon River. He was standing in the prow. He lost his balance and fell into the water and was in a rage when it happened. Well, that would make the tree incident the second time Finney did something clumsy. Maybe Phineas is not as perfect as Gene thinks he is. We come to a symbol in the book. The Devon School sits between two rivers. If you think of a fork in the road, the Naguamset River is a little dirtier, a little harsher, and runs down to a larger river, which runs into the sea, which runs into the Gulf Stream and onto the moon. The Naguamset reaches the outside world. Devon seems to think it's insulated from the outside world. It isn't. The other river is the Devon River. It's an inland river. But Gene doesn't know his topography. All rivers flow into the ocean, into the Gulf Stream, into the moon. So there's no avoiding the outside world. There's a war going on at Devon as well. He just doesn't want to admit it. And he's between two emotions, love and hate, or caring and not caring, or respect and envy. He's between two emotions. He's at a fork in the road emotionally. So he's taken on an extracurricular job. He's the assistant crew manager and says it's the kind of a job that boys with physical disability take. He doesn't have a physical disability, but maybe he has an emotional one. He goes down to the dock to meet the real crew manager, a guy named Quackenbush. Just from his name, he doesn't sound very likable. He's not liked. He's ridiculed a lot. And when he sees Gene, he's looking for a limp. He's looking for somebody who has a physical disability. Gene points out this is the kind of guy who's always disliked and is always insulted because he's so obnoxious. And he considers, Quackenbush does, that Gene is inferior to him and calls Gene maimed. Well, we got to look at that word maimed. What does that mean? Well, that means you're wounded, you're disformed in some way. And Gene's first thought is that Finney is maimed. Well, we could say all of us are maimed emotionally in some way. We've all been disformed and hurt in some way, or will be. So maimed is a very general term. And when he says this, Gene gets so angry that he hauls off and he punches Quackenbush. So here's Gene, the rule follower, the guy who never breaks a rule, who thinks rules are made to be followed. He punches a guy. It's totally out of character for him, but he's angry. And he dresses it up by saying, well, I said I did it for Finney because he's making fun of maimed kids. But he's really doing it for himself. One of the headmasters confronts Gene and says, now, summer's over, and I heard there was some gaming going on in my dormitory, and I'm going to have to restore order and bring it back, put it back together again. This makes Gene recall the card games they had. Of course, Finney started them. And Finney felt he should always win if only the cards had not betrayed him. Well, betrayal's in the novel, or Gene thinks it is. Gene somehow thinks he's betrayed Finney, or maybe Finney betrayed him by trying to wreck his studies. It's hard to say, but betrayal is there. Who betrayed who, and in what way? And yet Gene wishes in the summer he had taken advantage of Finney's friendship. And he's right, he should have. He should have embraced it wholeheartedly, not let envy or malice creep into the relationship, but just taken it, and it would have done him good. And he feels like a defendant in a courtroom. Apparently he feels he's guilty because the evidence he's presenting is not favorable to him. And he calls Finney up. Finney's still recuperating in Boston, and he talks to him on the phone. He hears in his voice a lot of friendliness, a lot of affection, and he's a little startled by that. And Finney says, I thought you were a little crazy after our last talk. Well, that was the talk where Gene said, I jounced the limb, I made you fall, it's my fault. Remember Finney's reaction? Get out of here, shut up. Sit down, shut up, or I'll make you shut up. Get out of here, you're making me sick. Okay? He thought he was crazy. But he also is thankful that Gene did not let anybody take his place in that room where they roomed together. Gene does not have a roommate now. So he was loyal, and Finney appreciates that loyalty. He didn't let anybody take my place. Gene is definitely done with sports. He talks about football players, and they're football players at Devon. He says they're trying to crush the life out of each other. Well, yeah. Did Gene try to crush the life out of Finney? I don't know, but Gene's not sure about that still. And he thinks that jumping out of that tree is a real good rehearsal for jumping out of a torpedoed ship. A torpedo hit by a torpedo from a submarine. It's a good image because right about now, a lot of convoy ships are being torpedoed by Nazi submarines, and a lot of guys are jumping into the cold North Atlantic, and they're going to drown in that part of the war. And then Gene gets this idea. Finney says to Gene, well, how about this? You can play sports for me. Well, okay, that always brings up a few questions. Will Gene be anywhere near as good as Finney is at sports? Will he be able to play football for him and maybe basketball and baseball and all that? Gene's not that athletic. How is he going to do that? And Gene feels freedom from this. And now he wants to be a part of Finney. Doesn't say which part he wants to be part of. And that ends the part of chapter 6. So Gene, at the end of chapter 6, still waiting for somebody to suspect him, accuse him, point a finger at him. Still nobody has. And he commits an act of violence, which is kind of unusual for him. Now, if I were to ask other questions about chapter 6, what look does Gene have on his face when they play cards? And what has deserted Devon, we already know. He tells us everything else, but Gene definitely steps out of character. Okay, we're done.